My name is Susan Evans McClure. I'm the Director of Smithsonian Food History Programs here at the National Museum of American History, where we explore American history through what we eat, what we cook, and how it's grown. Today, we are thrilled to have this fabulous panel with us to talk about stories of Latinos working in American agriculture today and throughout American history. And we hope that you will join the conversation. The program is called Ask a Farmer, so you will also be doing the asking. And you can do that by just raising your hand and I'll pull out some questions. Or you can use the hashtag online Smithsonian Food to join the conversation. And I especially want to thank our supporters who made today's program possible, the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. And also thank you to John Deere for supporting agricultural programming at the museum. And now, to the important part, which are our panelists for today. To my left is Jesse Larios, and he is a manager at Foster Feed Yard, raising 36,000 beef cattle in Brawley, California. To his left is Rudy Arredondo, is the president of the National Latino Farmers and Ranchers Trade Association. And then rounding out our distinguished group is Steve Velasquez, who is an associate curator here at the National Museum of American History. And Steve's projects include the Bracero History Archive, which collected stories from 7,000 Mexican nationals brought to the US to work in agriculture, fields, and railroads in the 20th century. And he's also leading the Latinos in Napa collecting project, looking at Latino winemakers and vineyard workers in Napa, California. So with that, and to hear less from me, I'm going to ask Jesse to start us off here. And Jesse, can you tell us a bit about your farm and how you got started working in agriculture?
Okay, well, thank you. This will be recorded and it's going out over the internet next week, so please be patient with me. I want to say something to my family that's watching back home. A todos mi familia de Mexicali, México, le quiero mandar un saludo grande. Le quiero también dar las gracias a mis padres que me enseñaron el esfuerzo, la disciplina y el carácter de mandarme a la escuela y enseñarme que con trabajo duro y con mucho orgullo que yo puedo hacer mis metas y alcanzarlas en el día de hoy. Pero muchas gracias a mi padre por enseñarme eso. Now, I just gave thank you to, said hi to all my family in Mexico, and I said thank you to my parents. My parents set the foundation of discipline and character, and they showed me that with a strong education and a strong work ethic, I went off to college. I went to Fresno State University and I graduated with a degree in ag economics. But my history goes much further than that. I was basically born at the farm which I manage today. My father worked there for 43 years. He had a house offered to him when he was barely employed there. Or not barely employed there, but was employed there. And I was born in Mexico. It took 2 months to get my paperwork in order, and we moved to the farm. I grew up there until the day I went off to college. Many of the employees that saw me go off to college also saw me come home from college, okay? So to them, they're my family. They're also a family. When we say in American agriculture, 92% of farms are family farms, we don't refer to ownership. We refer to our employees. We have the strongest ag industry in the world. That's because we have the strongest and the best ag labor in the world. We have great employees that are dedicated and they love being with us. We take very good care of them. Now, together, fast forward, my father retired from the feed yard at 43 years of employment. He also worked with three of my uncles. The four of them retired with a total of 163 years. 163 years working for the family farm. That is very rare in a Fortune 500 company. And that is something that I take a lot of pride. Right now, I'm on my 18th year on the farm. Yes, I am Hispanic. My family does not own the farm, but we took a lot of pride into it. The Foster family has offered me opportunity. I say, thank God I'm in America, because every day I open my door, I see opportunity. And my father always told me, son, with hard work, there's opportunity. The harder you work, the more opportunity is going to come to you. And that's what has got me where I am today. Now, why did I get involved in agriculture? Why did I come back to the farm? Unfortunately, a lot of Hispanics see our fathers come home after a long day work, and don't want to pursue those same steps. I was the opposite. I loved it. I always refer to myself like a cattle dog that wants to go chase cows. I want to be out there. I want to be involved. I want to be involved with the people. I want to be involved in the process. As farmers, we have a moral obligation to take care of the land, to take care of our employees. We have a social responsibility. We also have a responsibility to taking care of the earth, treating our livestock with dignity, and doing a great job. I believe that we produce, well, I know that we produce the most efficient, most economical, and the safest product in the world. Because we also have a moral obligation in the United States as farmers to fight hunger. Currently in the United States, 1 in 5 children, I saw the exhibit right here, right next to us, full of children. 1 in 5 children in the United States experience hunger on a daily basis. That's just completely wrong. In an era with smartphones and computers, we have kids experiencing hunger. It's my moral obligation as a farmer to produce more food efficiently, sustainably, so those kids don't experience hunger on a daily basis. And that's why I got involved. I am a member of a group, Farmers Feeding the World. And we come into DC because we have a vision of ending hunger. We engage with congressmen into setting a sound food policy in order to end hunger. But that's where I got involved.
So Jesse, you've already gotten us thinking about all of the many parts of agriculture to start off our conversation. Your own story of growing up, living on the feedlot, then working there, going to college, coming back, getting involved in policy. Now, Rudy, you manage a national organization that works with farmers and farm workers and farm owners. Do you have a personal background in agriculture, and how did you get to working with the association?
Well, yes, my family, we were migrant farm workers. I started working in the fields when I was about 5 years old. There were no babysitters, so, we just hung out with my mom, and so we got bored being under the truck, and so we started following her around, and so that's how I got started. And I remember very well how miserable it was when it was drizzling, it was cold, and there is my sister, who was about 4 years old. My grandmother was taking care of the younger ones. It was awful. So I think I made up my mind back as young as I was that I didn't want to see other children be like that. So my life has been dedicated to work with farm workers, and so that was the genesis of the formation of this the National Latino Farmers and Ranchers. Is even though we were part of a bigger umbrella, the Rural Coalition, who is our mothership, helped us to be launched in 2005 when the National Agricultural Statistical Service put out a report that Latino farmers and ranchers had increased by 51%. That's in 2002. So that gave us the impetus to form this organization, to be involved in the policy formulation in terms of agriculture and food policy. And to this day, we worked on the farm bills. We just came back from Memphis, and we're working with NASS, which is the National Statistical Service at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And we know that we are continuing to grow. We grew from 2002 to 2007 to 2010 by 21%. So we
and
are
that's Latino farm workers grew.
Yes,
21%.
and that was the core group of when we started, was farm workers who had transitioned from farm work into farm ownership, which includes my family. We have family farm in right now in northwestern Ohio near Toledo. and that's where my family is. We're still farming, and we still have the family farm, and we are very involved with various organizations. We're going to be doing Farm Aid later this week. We're with Willie Nelson, and have been a part of that for the past 7 years. So we are very involved in all of that, and I've subscribed to the same characteristics that Jesse Larios just outlined. We're land-based people. We are very, very concerned about maintaining the land. We're the best land stewards there are in terms of protecting our water and making sure that we provide healthy and safe food to those of you who consume. As small producers, we provide 22% of specialty crop, which is your edibles. That's who we are in terms of small producers, okay? So we very much appreciate your consumption. And, everybody's involved in agriculture because everybody eats. And so, we are we've begun last year in terms of putting together a team to work on the Farm Bill that's coming up, which whenever that starts, we are going to be ready to do that. And like Jesse said, we also bring in those the leadership in our organization. And we are sorry that Rigo Rios, who also has a very compelling story, and he's our Vice President for Business Development and Policy, couldn't be here. So I'm substituting on his behalf. And Rigo, thank you so much. Sorry you couldn't make it. I know Fresno is a difficult place to leave.
So I appreciate that you've both mentioned the Farm Bill and policy. It's a very complex topic, and I'm going to officially invite you back to talk with us about the Farm Bill at a later date, because I think that could take hours of discussion about what it is and how it works and how you advocate on behalf of farmers around it. But you've also both told stories of your personal stories of starting working in farm labor and then transitioning to farm ownership or farm management. Now, Steve, in your research ongoing that you've been doing for several years, is this a common story that you see throughout American history, or how does this align with the research that you've been doing?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming, the distinguished panel and everybody here. It is a very similar story. I've been working recently with farmers, grape growers, grape farmers, grape ranchers, and they in Napa. And so, in terms of the numbers of farmers, it's very small in terms of total number of farmers in California, total numbers of Latino farmers. And I've been looking at these Mexican American producers who their families have come through as Mexican guest laborers, braceros, in the 50s and 60s, working in the orchards, got to know the land, got to know the people, got to know the best places, the best grapes, leased, purchased land, became farm managers, and now their children are now owners of the land, making their own wines. So in Napa, where I'm looking at, it is a very common story. When you step back in time a little bit and sort of look at the trajectory of other migratory groups who would come to California, it is pretty similar. Migratory waves, leasing land, owning land, and essentially what it is, it's the children of immigrants, of Mexican Americans, of Germans, of Armenians, of Japanese, they want to become their own boss, right? They don't see that that working in the fields, they see more opportunities, right? They see more opportunities, and so they want to become their own boss. And so it is a very common story that I hear a lot in California, and by looking through the record of California migration and ag labor.
Mm-hmm. So in some ways, what you're all talking about is, our idea of an American dream story, that you come to the United States and you work really hard and you learn things and you become connected to the land and you become part of the American story. And over time, those the way that happens changes. So I think what I'd like to open it up to all of you with what are the big changes that you've seen, both as Latinos working in agriculture, but I would also say in agriculture overall, that have really impacted some of the stories we're talking about?
Well, I would just like to say that looking at some of these projects, looking back, I'm really interested in how migration, Latino migration, has changed both the social landscape, but also the physical landscape, but then also the policy and politics of what's happening. And you see that very clearly when you're looking at 1950s guest workers, 1960s, the rise of farm labor activism and Poor People's Campaign and war and poverty. All of those are leading and changing the way California agriculture has operated, and I'm assuming has changed other aspects of agriculture as well. And so for us here at the museum, it's looking back to see how these families, these farmers, these policies have changed over time.
So Jesse, how are some of the technological changes that you're seeing impacting the labor changes that Steve has been talking about?
Like Steve mentioned, there's some policy changes that will change our labor force and how we do business. Us at our farm, we're very concerned about it because we have great employees. Like I mentioned, my cattle foreman's been with me for 39 years. My feed mill foreman, Pepe, been with us for 40 years. And I got 5 employees that are over 20. One is approaching 30 years of employment. They're there because they love their job, and we do a good job taking care of them. And that's why we're so concerned on that. But technological changes, give you an example. One stigma that we fight is that we give too much antibiotics to animals. And we don't keep track of them. Right now, when every animal comes into my yard, digitally I receive an email that has their birth date, their birth weight, and where they were born. I upload that into my computer system. When the animals come in, we give them all their vaccinations. And when they get their vaccination, we even write down the lot number of every animal that coincides with an electronic RFID tag. I think most of all know what RFID is, but that coincides with the visual number on the animal. Anytime that animal gets sick, we also identify, we identify that animal and by the weight of the animal. And right there, my cowboys come up to the computer screen and they will type in the weight. This animal, he came in weighing 299 pounds. Right now he weighs 401. And what is he in here for? Respiratory. They touch R, and my vet has already programmed into my system, this is the first time this animal got sick. He weighs 401 pounds. According to his body weight, you give him exactly this much of this antibiotic and this much of this antibiotic. No more. Now, I will use you as an example. When you get sick, does the doctor weigh you and say, take a pill and a half of this and 1 pill of this? No, your doctor looks at you as all the same. The same whether you weigh 150 pounds or you weigh 250 pounds. We don't do that with our animals. We keep track by weight. At the same time, we measure production by weight because there's different markets. Every animal does not go into the same box. I got some markets in Japan. I got some markets in Europe. I got some markets here in the US. So I don't have to force every animal into each market. Now, at the same time, when the animals get sorted to go to market, every animal will get its ID identified, and we verify that all antibiotics, any animal that got sick, not all animals get antibiotics, but if an animal did get sick, we verify with the computer system that all of the antibiotics have left the system. So they are free of antibiotics. Now, here's my challenge to you. At any point, if you were to point an animal in my farm and tell me his visual ID or give me identification on him, I will tell you what vaccine he got, the day he got it, and I will tell you the name, the lot number on the box of the vaccine he got. The reason I use this because When my daughter went to high school, I had to prove her vaccination cards. Took me 2 days to find that little card with all the little stamps. And I laugh because if you were to point at an animal on my farm, it would take me about 15 seconds to tell you all his vaccination records. When I got sick, what was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? My doctor had an iPad, and you weigh this, you lost weight, you did this, you got that. Isn't that impressive? I said, doctor, you're barely doing this. I've been doing it for years and years. I did it like 10 years before you did. So I had better software for my livestock than the doctor had it for myself. That's technology on the farm. That's how we make. That's how I can tell you right now, I'm giving you the most efficient and the most safest product ever made. And we use that with technology. Now, back to my labor force. I got a darn good labor force. Guess who runs that technology? Those employees have been there 39, 40 years. Some have been there 20 and 30 years. They have adapted. That's how I do it. And that's how I'm able to come from California all the way to DC and be in front of you, because I have good employees.
So Jesse, you're talking about the experiences on a feedlot, so working with cattle that are going to market. Rudy, so the farmers you work with, are they, what industries are they working in, and what changes are you seeing in their different industries?
Well, we are not as advanced in terms because we don't do feedlots. Most of our farmers and our ranchers have small herds, anywhere between 10, 20, 30, maybe as much as 100. And most of that is for local consumption. So the product is sold in either a farmer's market, or it is, we have an established market for, because we don't have the kind of operations in terms of a feedlot where you have a big market. It's very small. It's sustainable for our community because we are very concerned about the fact that we need to be in an area where if there's any crisis, and that's our communities need to have food available nearby. So we're not that much into concentration because, like I said, that's a different level of agriculture. But we are, for instance, in terms of our organizational members, according to the Ag Census, there's about 99,000 Latino farmers and ranchers, according to the Ag Census. I know that's an undercount because we have, our organization, we have 75,000 members already. And so we own at least 23 million acres and provide about $8.3 billion in terms of, that's our stats. And we know, as I said, that it's another account, because we have constantly, some of those farmers that are coming or becoming members of our organization, they had no idea sometimes the fact that you as Department of Agriculture resources that you can access. The Department of Agriculture has not invested a lot of money in terms of small production of small producers. It's a very difficult agency to navigate through. The information is mostly held within the confines of their offices. They don't know how to do outreach. They are mostly pushing paper, and that's no disparaging with regard to their efforts, just that they don't have the staff and the ability, so we do it for them. I mean, we're by default an appendage of the Department of Agriculture, and unfortunately in the last 8 years we have not seen, at least Latino farmers, the Secretary Vilsack has not come to our events. We just had our 10th anniversary, and he was invited to the keynote, but we never heard from him. So we are concerned in terms of the neglect, not just in terms of us as Latino farmers, but small producers. Because, like I said, we provide 22% of specialty crops, which are your edible crops. And but we are growing, and like I said, part of it is just an undercount. It's not so much that they're not out there. I think I don't know how much, I can't project, but I know that we're going to be working right now in terms of making sure that our farmers know that they need to register their farms with the Farm Service Agency at USDA in order to be able to be counted, and because that provides resources so that we can go to the Congress and request an adequate amount to be able to, especially with beginning farmers. We're extremely concerned in terms of getting new farmers come and help us to cultivate crops.
Now that's really interesting, and it made me think about, Steve, your work. Both of our other panelists have talked about policy and government and the relationship between Latino farmers and the government. And can you I'm going to ask you to back up a little and explain to us what the Bracero program was, and then kind of fast forward that and look at how that has changed throughout history. You mentioned the labor movements in the 70s, but can you just tell us what the Bracero program was? And I think, Jesse, you mentioned that your father came originally to the US through the Bracero program. And I don't know if there was any connection with your family there, Rudy, but Steve, can you just tell us what that was?
So the Bracero program was technically called the Mexican Agriculture Workers Program. It was a wartime measure to bring in temporary guest workers to work in the fields and the railroads during World War II. It was run by the Department of Labor, the War Information Group, and Department of State. And so it was this big, massive project which brought in, it was only supposed to last until the war, but it actually lasted technically until 1964, and it brought in about 4.5 million guest workers throughout that period of time. They were sent to 38 different states across the United States, orchards in Washington, cotton in Texas. They were sent up Chicago railroads through DC, so it was a big government sponsored program, and it really just sort of legalized or normalized what had been going on for generations before, which was streams of migratory labor that would come up to help work the crops. But this put so many layers in place that it sort of created, strengthened the agriculture associations, the state boards, things like that. And what it did from a social aspect was create this stream of migratory labor to other places that hadn't been before, and created sort of a revolving migratory stream in some of these other places. Men started to settle down in some of these areas where they were working. They liked it, like in Napa, or avoided places they didn't like so much, like some of the desert places they were sent to. But in some places, sort of revived struggling economies in the 50s, struggling towns. Some cases expanded and exploded the areas of other communities that had not seen streams of Mexican-American labor before. And so what this did is it starts to create these communities which lead to people laying down their roots, which leads to people wanting to get more into agriculture, more into making their own mark, making their own way through life, not having to rely on other people's, not having to have other people as a boss. Which leads me to a question that I actually had about how contemporary Latinos are sort of managing buying land, buying equipment. In the early days, in the 50s, 60s, when some of these Mexican settlers were coming in, and throughout time, they were relying on their own sort of ethnic community organizations to help fund this. And you were talking about how the government agencies aren't necessarily helping. How are the individual families managing this? That was one question. And then, do they see the small farm? Do you see the small farm as more important to them? Because I would imagine small farmers have more direct one-on-one streams, right, with the consumer. They're not, they're not selling to a middleman. So is that something that is more appealing to them? Would they, how does that work in your?
Well, in my family's instance, we when we were migrating, the second time actually that we went out to the crop, my father was an extremely frugal man and someone that could hang on to money, unlike me. And so the second year, when we came back, he bought 3 acres. 1.5 acres was actually, you could plant on it, but the rest was kind of brush and mesquite, and those roots went down to all the way to China, as I recall, because I was about 13, 14 years old. My sister and I, after school, would go in and dig those damn roots out. And eventually, as a result of the production, because we planted tomatoes, we planted cotton and corn, the income from that, we were able to purchase the next year 10 more acres. That's just in South Texas where we lived. And my father was a master farmer and all his life, and he was used to manage Senator Lloyd Benson's father's farm, which were thousands of acres. So he was always kind of someone that they looked up to him to help them with their managing their farms. So when we settled out in northwestern Ohio, near Toledo, the farmer that we used to come and do the harvesting, he had tomatoes, he had carrots, green beans, and helping with his soybean crop, was elderly, and he offered the farm to my father, and he said, I don't have any heirs, so would you like to have a farm? So it's a word of mouth kind of thing, and he helped us out quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot in the Midwest where you had the migrant stream that went that way from either Florida or from Texas or from Arizona. So that's part of it. It's basically an exchange, that takes place among ourselves, because it's a very close-knit. And my father wasn't about, he wanted it. Both my mom and my dad they wanted to have a farm, and they did. They were actually able to, to make their dream come true. And so, as a result of that, we continue to have the family farm in our possession. So that's how it is. And now, as a result of NAFTA, when Mexico and NAFTA came into effect, it really drove a lot of the small producers from Mexico who couldn't recover the cost of production. And so they came to the Southeast. So we're looking at this new phenomena of having farm and farm workers in the non-traditional, like in the Southwest. I mean, that's a given. I mean, everybody there. Not only that, we were there for generations, and the border crossed us. So in that respect, we are looking now at a core group of displaced Mexican farmers that are now, they own land, they own farms, they own their own restaurants, and they have their own grocery stores. And they revived a lot of those rural communities where the textiles and other industries abandoned those rural communities, and they are revitalized as a result of this immigrants' presence. So we're very innovative, and especially any immigrant group, there's a tremendous amount of motivation to ensure that you and your families do better than they did. Certainly, that is what we do with, all of us do that with our kids. We want our kids to do better than we did, So that's a part of certainly a part of the answer. I know that's a whole, but I had 2 uncles who, as a result of my father and my mother being in Texas, that came from Mexico, and as braceros.
So there's an interesting interplay here between personal motivations and government policy that seems to be happening across all of your experiences in different ways. But it is called Ask a Farmer. So I want to take a second to see if anyone has any questions in the audience that we can throw at our panel. I know I have some more, but we have one in the back there.
Hi, thank you guys very much for being here. And Jesse, I don't know where my vaccination card is, so now I have to go find that. My question is about, Rudy sort of, you touched on it a little bit. When you were talking about the Bracero program and the idea of 4 million guest workers coming to the United States, but why would that have even been sort of shocking if, as Rudy said, the border crossed a lot of Mexican farmers with the Treaty of Hidalgo? So where's that gap of either in our history or our knowledge of history, where there were obviously Mexican farmers in the Southwest? How did, basically my question is, I feel like there's a gap where suddenly, was it just normalized because of the Bracero program and they were going across the United States, or were Mexican farmers sort of forced out of their farms and their ranches in the Southwest and California, so that it became a different sort of structure there? It's not a fully formed question, but it just seemed interesting. It feels like there's two waves of sort of migration happening here or something like that.
So it seems like the porousness of that region, right, where you have two countries that are next to each other, there's big questions there, right, around who decides where the border is, what that means to the people who live on either side of it, especially when the border moves. So anybody want to take a stab at that, at what that has meant and why that idea of borders and locations have changed?
Well, I mean, it's all about economics. Okay, it's the restrictions between the borders either are elevated or downgraded as a result of the needs of the United States agriculture. It's a powerful and very it's a very powerful industry. So the thing is that and it's unfair to those who rely on their livelihood being in agriculture. So policies, it results as like I said, it's driven by politics. And so, we have a big issue as a result of NAFTA, where we have over 11 million undocumented workers in the United States. Now, this wage increase that is required, which part of the transition from a lot of the immigrants who were in agriculture is they go to other, like construction, for instance, which pays more. And so even though it's seasonal, whereas agriculture is always been like a very low paid industry in terms of wages, and it's hard work. That's not to say that construction is not hard work, certainly is, but it's compensated because of the need of those industries. Now, I'm also hearing from some of our dairy farmers in terms of the fact that they're losing also a lot of their workers. And now I also hear from my other sheep producing folks that rely on H-2, which is your agriculture visas, that they are losing some of their workers, H-2 workers, to the dairy industry. And so they are right now, as we speak, I just, because we belong to several of these industries, certainly like sheep producers and independent beef producers, they've come into Washington because they're extremely concerned about these trade agreements. And we won't get into where it is, but we're concerned about the consequences because of the NAFTA experience for us, okay? and what they did to our markets, which it just created a concentration, and we rely, like I said, on small markets because we are not able to do the kind of things like the feedlots. You know, they have a tremendous amount of inventory. We don't. You know, and like I said, most of us are rely on consumption in our own local communities.
Now, Jesse, I know you've told me a little bit yesterday about your personal experience because you've both worked in the United States and Mexico. So can you just tell us about that back and forth exchange for you and how that happened?
I was fortunate enough to work in Mexico for about 2.5 years. And the mindset of working with a group of workers that get paid $8 a day is different. I came in from the United States expecting a similar workforce. It wasn't. When I expected an employee to do a certain job would take an hour or two, it was taking them 8 hours. When I questioned the employee, what was taking so long? He said, "Hey boss, you pay me $8 a day. What hurry do I have?" So I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. You get done with that job, you go home, I'll pay you $8. Whether it takes you 1 hour, it takes you 8 hours. He was down an hour and 15 minutes. I found out that motivation, knowing to speak their language, made a big difference. I found out that our labor force, our culture, we're more about forming a team. I started remembering anniversaries, birthdays, days of special meaning to them, barbecue, patting them on the back. That was the labor force in Mexico. That's how things got done. When I came back to the States, it's very similar to my labor force, but it was easier because I also got to go back and work with the same people that saw me go off to college. But I will talk to about farmers in my valley, the Imperial Valley, or even California. We can't find enough labor to harvest our crops. Crops are being unharvested, okay? I know a lot of you are concerned about global change or climate change. Number one contributor to that, now cow farts. It's not transportation. It's spoiling food. I know we talked about hunger and we said 1 in 5 children, but food that spoils in your trash cans that you throw away in your kitchen or in restaurants, but most of all, food that goes unharvested in the fields or in the orchards. We have to address that. In my valley, we can't find enough labor to harvest that food. Beautiful crops, not enough labor. By the time we get to it, it's already spoiling. Can't take it to the market, you guys won't buy it. But we have, unfortunately, had to mechanize certain harvesting techniques, not against employees. Like I said, we have a great labor force, but we can't have enough to harvest that. I'll give you a perfect example. One of them is your lettuce, your green leaves. The way it is done now, the crop gets planted, machine comes by, picks them all, whether it's ripe or not, chops it all up, puts it in a nice little bag, you guys buy it. Well, pretty soon, I believe we can't have a good labor force or continue to have a labor force. We're going to do the same thing with the head of lettuce, where people like you would say, remember when grandma would bring home a head of lettuce? What happened? We lost the labor force. We either have to mechanize or we have to bring it in from another country. That's where we don't want to go. You know, we say the greatest generation. Right now, we're transitioning from the greatest generation of labor. And we're having a difficult time finding good labor. I mean, one of the things that I talk to consumers is we all have this stigma in our minds, I don't, of the greedy farmer. And the perception people have goes back to the 1970s, where they drive squeaky machines, those yellow Caterpillars that make your building shake. Caterpillars have rubber tracks. Our tractors have cabs. They have air conditioning. They have XM radio. They have GPS. Some of them drive themselves. That doesn't mean we don't have, I still know some people that will outdrive a GPS. But they're becoming fewer and fewer and fewer. And we're having to use these technologies in order to produce your food more efficiently. You know, one thing we're very fortunate in the United States is our disposable income. Only 10% of your paycheck goes to buy your food. In some countries, it's more like 80%. Imagine if your paycheck went to 80%, you wouldn't be able to, you may have to live in a smaller house or maybe not a car. But we're very fortunate to have a safe and a cheap food supply. And that's how we do it, because we do it efficiently using these new technologies. But I will change the subject up a little bit, because I feel that I do need to reach out across the table. In California, I take a lot of pride saying, back to the stigma of the greedy farmer. In California, the USDA told me 33%, one in three farmers are women. Women. You know, I take a lot of pride in that, because I was right. Who runs our checkbook in the house? Who runs our household? Who organizes and plans and takes the kids here and takes that? Women. You women do a great job in our family. Why wouldn't I let you guys run farms? Yeah. That's why women have brought us there too. Another, according to the 2012 USDA Ag Census in California, take a lot of pride. 15% of farms are by Hispanics. 15%. Are we saying women are greedy? Are we saying Hispanics are greedy? The point I'm trying to make is this concept. We have evolved. We are a dynamic group, and we are changing. Our technology is changing. Our people within our industry is changing. It's becoming harder and harder to operate. Yes, we do need to reach out to the USDA, maybe find ways to get that number to expand or make it easier. But we are a very dynamic group, and I'm very proud to say I'm part of.
So it's interesting to think about how there is no monolithic American agriculture. There's many, you work on a larger operation. You said you represent and work with a lot of smaller farmers, women, people of different race, ethnicity, religions, lots of people working in American agriculture. So some of these issues that you've brought up, how do you see them changing in the future? If you had a crystal ball and could look into the future of agriculture in the United States, what would it look like from your perspectives?
Well, I place my bet on the small producers, because they are the ones that maintain that spirit of we are land-based people. Whatever happens out there in the world is that we're farmers, and that's our culture. That's what we are about, and we're extremely concerned about the sustenance of our immediate communities, and we are experiencing tremendous amount of issues with the droughts, with the floods. Climate change is a reality to us, and we have to deal with it. We've had to have some of our stockmen reduce their herd, because when you have a drought, you can't feed all the animals, and so we had to develop a caravan of taking hay to, for instance, in Oklahoma, when they were experiencing a drought, and the same thing with Texas and in New Mexico. One of the things that has always concerned us is the fact that agriculture. When you talk about agriculture, is you see these huge combines, and that's not our experience. Now, the West is different. We have forest, we have different geography, and that is where a lot of things are happening, and we don't get any play, neither do the small producers that we're a part of. We're the heart and soul of agriculture. I mean, and also in terms of our conservation, our mindfulness in terms of ensuring that the water is pristine, and so that we can be able to use it for our crops and for ourselves. That is really, really important. To us, the land is sacred, and it is important to conserve what there is in order for the next generation.
Great. I think we have another question in the audience. We'll bring a microphone to you, and then we'll do one more. So.
Thanks. Okay, yes, I'd like to thank you for being here as well. This is very informative. And I appreciate your explanation of how you deal with the animals regarding health. As an urbanite, I know nothing about farming, so I appreciate your patience with this question. It has to do with pesticides. I've always wondered how Farmer Brown, who is trying to grow organically, deals with Farmer Jones down the road, who's using pesticides. How does that work? Does the wind carry I mean, how does the organic farmer protect his or her crops? Thank you.
So I think how do organic farmers and non-organic farmers work together or work separately? And I'm going to extend that to say, how have you seen the need for pesticides and pesticide use change in your experiences as technology has changed?
Oof.
All right, we're wrapping up. So
the thing is that, for instance, we make every attempt to grow our product organically. However, in order to be, quote, certified organic, it's an extremely long and expensive process. So the best you can do is, in terms of, for instance, we work in several farmers markets. We have one here at the University of the District of Columbia, at Connecticut and Yuma, every Saturday for the past 7 years. They grow their crop organically, but because they cannot control the drift that takes place, and we try to use organic products in terms of making sure that the pests that are there, and they're not always successful, but they do the best they can. So, because when you're certified organic, the entire production from your planting to the market has to be organically certified. Those, you have to really be completely clean of any residues and all of that stuff. So it's a tremendously expensive process. And as long as our petrochemicals are available, I'm sorry, because like I said, to transition into a certified organic is just, you have to your land has to be fallow for extended amount of time. It has to be purified. You have to ensure that at a certain time you keep testing the soil until you've got rid of all the toxins. And like I said, our producers don't have that kind of income. They have to keep producing. So the best they can do is say, it was grown organically, but we cannot guarantee that it's certified. So
that's a government and regulation story too,
correct.
Which is interesting that that's come up in several different topics that we've talked about. Do you want to talk about that at all from a farm that is not organic? I believe.
Well, I will move it over to the beef side. Like I said, I got different markets, different boxes. I also produce a beef that has no hormones and no antibiotics. But what happens when an animal gets sick? Is it humane to let them be sick? No, I give them antibiotics. So that animal gets removed from the program. It gets shifted more to a commercial program. And that animal we might use another technology on it, but regardless, he gets antibiotics, but he does not go into the food supply until I make sure 110% that all antibiotics are out of his system. I have kept animals in my farm for more than enough time, but they have to wait until all antibiotics are out of the system. It is law. I cannot ship an animal to market that still has residue. Even if it got a antibiotic a week ago, if it's a 30-day withdrawal, it stays on the farm. It will not go. And that's how I'm able to track it with an identification. I call it their driver license. I put a driver license number in their ear and I keep track of every animal individually. But there's different markets for everything. And like I say, God bless America. We live in the greatest country on earth. We have options. This is what we're all about. You want to buy this, you want to buy that, you want to buy this? Hey, more to you. We'll give you your options. You guys decide at the supermarket which ones you're going to buy and which you're going to pay for. And then I will adjust at my farm to produce what my consumer wants.
So really consumer-driven decisions in a lot of ways, as long as you have access to the consumers with what you're producing on that. I think we had one more question, and then we'll wrap up with our panel.
Good afternoon. Oh, is it on? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiana, and my question was in regards to like the antibiotics, the hormones type of things. Because growing up, like where I go to school, and even here in DC, people always make comments about hormones being in the food, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, like my kids they're different than when I was growing up because of the hormones." Where do you think comments of that sort stem from? Because you guys addressed it up there about hormones. So why do you think that people have this idea in their head that hormones are so like prominent in the food that we're eating, and that they're saying that farmers and people who deal with food are injecting our food with hormones?
I'm going to actually take it a step further too and say, why do you think, beyond the statistical numbers, why do you think there is such a disconnect that we're all experiencing between farmers and people who eat food, which we all do every day?
That is a very good question, and thank you for asking. I blame myself. I blame my industry. For too long, I haven't invited you to my farm. So now, today, instead of bringing you to the farm, you work. Now we bring the farm to you. And I'll thank the Smithsonian and USFRA for offering me this opportunity to be here to answer your questions. But we haven't communicated with you about not only hormones, but a lot of issues. And that's where it all stems from. I believe now that there's more communication, I invite you all to go to fosterfeedyard.com and look at my website. There's all the information and my contact information. Every time I go in front of a consumer, I invite you and I get emails. I'll answer all your questions anytime. But to the hormone question, yes, we do use hormones. Not at all the animals, small. Because some animals don't have the genetics in order to produce this food efficiently. And like I said, we have an obligation, a moral obligation, to produce food as efficient as we can. Some animals, in the past, we have improved our genetics. We have selected animals that will produce food efficiently, and those don't need antibiotics. I send those to a specialty market. But there's animals that aren't doing it efficiently. So I might use a hormone. I might use that technology. But when that beef is harvested, if I tested the hormone level in that beef, and I told you that if you eat a cup of peas, there's more estrogen in a cup of peas, or if I told you there was more estrogen in another product, in spinach, broccoli, there's more estrogen in that than in that beef. I mean, if we compare apples to apples, I mean,
So
it's minimal.
Science.
It is minimal.
A lot of it sounds like it's science and understanding of that, but it's also the being able to see farmers and interact with them
Yes.
when you maybe do live in a city, as you said you do here. So with that, we are just about out of time. So Steve, I'm going to actually ask you for your insights in this and why you think that talking about and documenting and researching Latino experiences are important to us understanding American history.
I think we all touched on it. It started with some of the family stories. It's the stories of migrations. We go back further, like I said before, Armenians, Chinese, Japanese, they're all have this link of migrations. So the changing demographics, the changing landscapes, it's very important, I think, to look at a subject like this to see where our farmers are coming from now. That's that migratory journey story. How is it different? How are they operating? Is it different or the same than before? That's very important to look at. Why are they operating the same, or why are they different now than they were back then? What's the politics behind it? What's the economics behind it? All of those stories are very important to document, to look at, to compare with others. And so that's one of the reasons why I think we need to think about this topic of Latino and farmers. And that's why I think it's important to study.
Great. So we hope that this has raised some questions for you here that you can go out and look into more on your own, or you're welcome to stay after and ask our panel a few more questions. And a big thank you to our panel for today. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you all for participating. And you can sign up for our email list here too and stay connected with us and come back to future programs and events. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your visit to the museum. Thanks.